And it's important to remember that we can't separate out ourselves as children of our parents when we are parenting. So we're either seeing the cycle repeat, I got yelled at, so now I'm yelling at you, or we're seeing overcorrections. I got yelled at, so I'm never going to hold a limit with you because I never want you to feel badly. And from either of those ends, we're seeing parents react from a place of automatic reaction or their own emotions. And
Awekenge, this is Mental Metals, hosted by textWhat.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mental Matters. I'm your host, textWhat. And before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation. Could you start by telling us a bit about your early experiences, how they shaped your current work?
yeah, so as a teenager, I struggled a lot. I was raised by a single dad. My parents went through a pretty violent divorce. And so I was left to my own devices to figure out how to cope with depression, how to cope with loss, how to cope with, coming to terms with a life that was not what I had imagined as a 12-year-old, 14-year-old, a girl being raised without a parent in the house. And before I found strength, resilience, coping skills that were effective, I did turn to unhealthy coping strategies. I did self-harm. I did think about suicide. And a lot of what got me through that period was a solid support system. I had an amazing friend group. They're still my best friends to this day. And my own ability to intellectualize, to read, to learn, to dive into anything I could to figure out how do I get through this. I leaned on music and reading and learning. And when I grew up, a surprise pregnancy kind of turned my life around. So my teen years led to young adult years that were even bigger and more dangerous behaviors. And then I found out I was pregnant and made the decision that the world is so much bigger than the pain inside me. I have to figure this out. I can't repeat this pattern. And that's part of what brought me here. And then, there's more to that story, of course.
And sometimes in life, I would say that we are dealt with cards that we think that are not, in terms of we don't deserve them. Definitely we don't deserve them. I feel like also within that there's strength, as you mentioned, there's resilience in terms of that. Being someone that, in terms of, as you know, that there's, as human beings, we have different coping mechanisms. And when it comes to teenagers, it's quite frightening, whereas their coping mechanism can range from joining gangs, running into drugs, going to alcohol. So in your story, would you say that you leaned on those particular things?
Absolutely. As I said, self-harm, thought of suicide. As I got older, I turned to substances. Anything that I could to dull the pain of my experience was what I turned to, because the pain was bigger than I had the ability to cope with at the time. And that makes sense. When I look at it from the therapist perspective, it makes sense that your brain is coming up with ways to escape the pain, to figure out how to not feel it. So in a sense, it's resourceful. It's also just dangerous and unhealthy.
And I would like to go to the thing that you mentioned, self-harm. And I don't know,
I also had some difficulties when it comes to mental well-being, and actually I was raised by a single parent, also by my mother. In a way, I really wanted to do that, but at the same time, I don't know what stopped me. Actually, in the initial, I don't know what stopped me off doing it. As someone who has done it, who has seen the consequences and looking onto the perspective of now and back then, how
Mhm.
would you say that it really closed that gap of that pain of inflicting inflicting another pain within yourself?
You're saying like, did doing it help me feel less pain?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, like when we think about it biologically, what it creates in your body is when somebody self-harms, whatever they were feeling before, they're not feeling during, either because they're focused on the physical pain or because it's releasing endorphins and decreasing their pain. And then afterwards, there's typically a reduction of that initial emotion. It brings up other emotions, though. It brings up shame, it brings up regret. Sometimes it's fear of someone else finding out. So it's not necessarily a solution, but in the short term, when you're so overwhelmed by your experience, that urge shows up because it quickly reduces your emotion.
It's quite interesting, actually, in terms of as you've said, that it brings up shame, it brings up regret, and sometimes whenever we are in that moment, we don't realize that there are consequences of every action that we do. So going back to when you mentioned that you had unexpected pregnancy
Mhm.
in in your 20s, how did that impact your mental health in terms of that?
I was incredibly scared. I was 26. I was still living at home. I had a drug habit at the time. I was making a lot of unhealthy decisions. And so finding out that I was pregnant was terrifying. I didn't know how my family was going to react. I didn't have my life together. So thinking about having to take care of someone else when I wasn't taking care of myself was really scary. And it was another one of those pivotal moments when I did what I tend to do best, is when things are really bad or really big or really scary, I figure out how to make it through them and I make the decision that's going to get me to the other side. So it was a turning point for me in recognizing I'm bringing someone into the world and I can't cause pain to them like I received pain in my childhood. So I'm going to break this chain. I'm going to be the one who breaks the cycle of generational pain.
Mm, mm, mm. And I believe that it was quite difficult to going through this journey, being able to try by any means to break that chain of, I would say, generational trauma.
Mhm.
And I would say, in terms of, as I've said, it wasn't easy. Can you take us through the moments that you had during this specific moment when you realized that this is my turning point of trying to better myself?
Yeah, I think it was probably a multifaceted turning point. There was the realization in the moment of what reality was. I'm pregnant. Now this is new information that is going to force me to take a good look at myself and make some changes. When I finally shared the information with my dad, who I lived with and who was my primary caretaker growing up, I think there was less upsetness than there was just resolve of this is the thing that happened and maybe this is what you need to change things. And so, my family, I'm feeling a little bit tearful even thinking about it, but a family that I felt so rejected by growing up actually came in to support me in that process. They kind of like rallied around me to support me in making the changes. Getting back to therapy, getting the support that I needed. And as luck would have it, around that same time, I actually got laid off from a position I was working at. And so I had some time to reflect and heal and think without having to go through day-to-day motions as well. So I really just had this space and time to figure out, who am I? What do I want out of life? What do I need to be the person that my child deserves?
Mm. And having your own, in terms of, firstly, I'm just conflicting in terms of which question should I ask, but I would like to continue in this conversation. You're also talking about on your profile. I saw that you also talk about raising your own teen as a fire filler. What unique change does this bring, and how has your professional expertise influenced your parenting?
I think that because I am a teen therapist, because I've been in the field for over 12 years and really seen so many parent-teen dynamics, teen behaviors, nothing really shocks me, surprises me, or scares me as a parent. I don't get freaked out easily. So anything that comes up, I feel equipped to deal with. I think I can validate my teen really well. I'm able to support them and say the right things. And at the same time, it's important to remember that as a parent, you really have no control. It's like if you think you have
Definitely.
control, it's an illusion. You can be there, you can support, you can validate, you can influence. But I think that was surprising for me that as much experience as I had, my teens still had to go through their own experience of figuring things out. And that meant we stumbled a little bit along the way, and me figuring out how to support them specifically rather than just these general themes and ideas of how to support. I think it's always going to be a little bit of a learning process to figure out what your unique child needs. And I had to go through that as well, no matter how much experience and training I had.
And I believe that when it comes to teenagers and just in general, as much as you yourself has experienced that certain have lived that thing of having troubles within your teen, and I feel like it is very different. It differs to people, and I've seen how in terms of portray in movies, in terms of how our teens are. And I feel like it's something that as parents don't actually observe instead of trying to have that final word, instead of being just not having a democratic household in terms of when it comes to parenting. There's this thing of listening, and most parents don't do that. That's why I feel like I believe that that's why teens always have this thing of running away from, for example, communicating. If I'm not, my feelings are not validated. If no one wants to hear me, I would rather go out with my friends. It's either I'm going to do drugs or I'm going to do alcohol, and it's something that is quite scary. And I've seen that, as I mentioned earlier, numbers of suicide rates are up there, and suicide is one of the most leading things that contribute to that, and it's quite alarming. You want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, from what you're saying, that the more parents push and don't listen, the more teens pull away. So I always say it's like a dance. If you want your teen to take a different step, you need to take a different step as a parent. So stop pushing so hard if you don't want them to move away so fast.
Definitely. You have the concept of breaking the cycle, the general cycle of hurt.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate what it really means to you, and how do you approach this in your practice?
Absolutely. As parents, we tend to repeat what we experienced as children. And it's important to remember that we can't separate out ourselves as children of our parents when we are parenting. So we're either seeing the cycle repeat, I got yelled at, so now I'm yelling at you, or we're seeing overcorrections. I got yelled at, so I'm never going to hold a limit with you because I never want you to feel badly. And from either of those ends, we're seeing parents react from a place of automatic reaction or their own emotions. And what we're not seeing is a regulated person making a wise mind decision. And what I mean by that is if you experienced any kind of challenge in your childhood and you have not worked on that as a person, if you have not processed the feelings around that, if you have not found a way to move through those emotions, you're going to repeat the cycle with your own child one way or another. And so when we're looking at breaking a generational cycle of pain, what we're really looking at is parents turning inward rather than expecting their child to do something differently.
It goes back to I came across this video on, I think, this earlier this week, whereas it was actually initially it was about grief, whereas this guy was explaining to his peers that how he lost his son, and whereas he said that sometimes as adults we don't, as I mentioned earlier, we don't listen in terms of whenever his son wanted to talk about something, he was always said that he is busy. She should come after 30 minutes. And I feel like at that specific time, I believe that you should just try by any means to hear what they are about to say, and how who you as an, I would say, as a parent can validate their feelings. And it's all about validation of feelings. If one doesn't seem to be heard, it will be in a form of I'm not loved. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
not good enough. Maybe I am just demanding too much. And one thing, and also another thing, that as much as one thing I realize about children that have gone through trauma is the fact that they blame themselves, that they were not
Yeah.
good enough to have parents. They didn't do enough. Whereas one thing that, as if any teenagers are listening in today's episode, I feel like something that I want to say is that you're just a kid. You are just a kid, and you are not supposed to fight for the love. You're not supposed to get to just, in terms of try to hard enough to get that validation from your parents. One thing that I feel like we should all be preaching as individuals and as people that are really promoting this thing around mental health, and not in terms of, when it comes to mental health, it's something that I would say it seems like, in a way, I seem to be judging parents, but I'm not in judging them per se, but in terms of trying to see the signs of that the kid is struggling and wants to be heard. Just wants to be heard. That's the one thing that I've seen. And I feel like when I look back within on my own life, I feel like in a way I never got the attention that I needed as a kid, but at the same time, I tried by any means to be useful in a way, and being able to be this person that really is strong, this person that really is able to take care of themselves. As I've said, that it's something that as teenagers we don't look at. And looking back now, I'm realizing that I was just a kid. I didn't have to do that much to be loved, to be just the person that I am today. So yeah.
I agree. I think there's something really important that you said in there about feeling like you were judging parents or blaming parents. And I find that when we're first approaching these topics, that parents can feel defensive or start to feel shame of course it's all my fault, or like, of course I'm being blamed for this. And so I always like to pause and validate parents as well, that they're doing the best that they can with the tools that they have, with the upbringing that they had. And there is this theory of the good enough parent. I remember when I was in graduate school learning these theories, and I had the same sort of feelings like, wow, of course, I'm going to mess up my kid just like I got messed up. And this is just going to continue. And my professor was really kind in saying, there's a theory of the good enough parent, which means you really only need to be perfect about 20% of the time. And the rest of the time, what's important is acknowledging when you cause harm and repairing that, and being able to have open communication so that you have trust and the ability to be imperfect, because it's not about being perfect, but about being present, about being empathetic, and about being able to talk to each other.
That's the thing of communication in terms of, as we're speaking about in terms of validation of feelings. And I feel like it goes back to these two people, the parents and also the teenagers, of not realizing that everyone is trying their best to
Yeah.
just be seen. And it goes back to another thing that I've seen. It's I forgot the resource name, but in a way, you feel like a little bit of encouragement is needed in a way, because I feel like it really sparks that thing of purpose. It sparks that thing of not, you realize that you're not alone and there are people out there that are there for you. As you mentioned, that you had a ton of supporting system, and I feel like something that we need to just take a look at. And
Absolutely.
diving back into that, when you realize that you had these problems in terms of have this intense drug, I would say drug addiction, how did your friends and your father take it?
When I was struggling,
Yes.
yeah, I lost a lot in that period. My best friend stopped talking to me, and later we reconnected. She's still my best friend to this day. And she said it hurt too much to see you self-destructing. I couldn't watch it happen anymore. I went down a dark path. I had a lot of intense emotions, a lot of hopelessness. And when people are in that state, they tend to act on these self-destructive urges, and it does push people away. And so it also then reinforces that internalized message that you're alone, that nobody likes you, that you're not good enough. And it's this,
Mm,
perpetual cycle of these behaviors that I was engaging in that were also pushing people away, that was also making me feel like I had no one, and on and on and on. And, it was a tough place to be.
mm. We have this thing of not accepting ourselves who we are,
Mhm.
and as much as we don't like it, we will always have certain flaws within us. And you drive that message of encouraging teens to accept themselves as who they are. How
Yeah.
do you balance validating their feelings while also encouraging them to develop a healthier coping mechanisms?
Yeah, so we always come from the stance of you're doing the best you can, and you can do better and try harder. And that doesn't mean just do it or it's going to be easy for you, but recognizing that doing the best you can right now is with the resources that you have now, is with the mood or emotional state that you're in right now, and that those things can improve when you learn new ways to cope, new ways to respond, new ways to communicate and ask for help. And so it's not either or, it's not you're not good enough now and you should be better. It's you are good enough and you're doing the best you can. And the goal is to always improve from here so that we can keep doing better, so that you can move to the
Mm,
life that you want too. Like, even if you're doing the best you can, and even if you're good enough, you might not be where you want to be in life, or you might not feel how you want to feel.
mm. And in terms of it really, as I mentioned, it's quite important to just accepting ourselves as the way we are. And I would like to revert in terms of being raised, that generational trauma that you mentioned, as and also not only that teenagers don't accept who they are, and also parents of not realizing that they are good enough and they are trying their best, as you mentioned.
Mhm.
How do you encourage or give advice to you? Or what advice do you have for parents who are struggling and to understand and support their teens with overwhelming emotions?
I have a lot of thoughts about this. The first one would be to recognize that whatever behavior they're seeing in their teen is communicating a message, that all behavior communicates a message. So, what is it that they're communicating? Are they sad? Are they struggling? Are they lonely? And then, along with identifying what your teen is trying to say, recognizing what that brings up in you and what you need to work on so that you can be the most regulated, calmest, most centered part or version of yourself to support your teen in this process. I always say parents go first, and that means parents need to learn coping skills. Parents need to learn how to regulate their emotions if they want their teen to learn those things too. We look at it like, you know, like a thermostat. It takes the temperature of the room and then it regulates rather than a thermometer, which rises to the occasion. We don't want to rise to the occasion if our teen is freaking out, sad, anxious, having a panic attack. We want to stay calm so that our teen can come back to that balance rather than us rising to their level of anxiety or dysregulation.
And it's quite interesting what you just said, because I believe that in terms of being, if you are overwhelmed as a parent with this emotion and also this, you have to deal with I would say your son or daughter in terms of that. It really is hard for a parent to just overcome that. And it's quite interesting that you mentioned that, and being able to be there in that calm position, calm state, whereas you'll be able to look at things in a proper way and not mischarge other things. And I just want to touch on DPT. It's a key part of your life. For listeners who might not be familiar, could you explain what is daily DBT, what is DBT is, and why it's particularly effective for teens with self-destructive behaviors?
Yeah, DBT stands for dialectical behavior therapy. It is the gold standard treatment for suicidality and self-harm. And what it is a skills-based treatment. It's based in the theory that if you are emotionally dysregulated, that you are lacking the skills to cope with your overwhelming emotions. And so we look at giving you practical and concrete coping skills for when your emotions are high, giving you the skills to interact, to have positive, healthy relationships and stable self-esteem. And we also look at what is driving behaviors and what is keeping behaviors in place. And that's one of the things I love so much about DBT is that it's not guessing what's wrong. It's really assessing, why is this behavior showing up? And then what specifically can we plug in to help you do something differently? So there's a lot of practice. There's a lot of rehearsing positive skills, being able to understand yourself better. It's not just talking about the problem, but it's actually moving you towards a solution.
It's acknowledging as much that is a problem, and there are ways that you could face it. You could, in a way. Actually, what are some core skills that DBT that you find most impactful for teens dealing with depression and self-harm?
Yeah. So one skill, we're working on it this week in our groups. It's called the TIP skill. It's part of the distress tolerance module, and everything in DBT is an acronym, which is another thing I like. It makes it easy to remember. But TIP stands for temperature, intense exercise, progressive muscle relaxation, and paced breathing. And they are all skills that you can use almost anywhere. You can breathe slowly anywhere. You can splash cold water on your face anywhere. You can squeeze and release your muscles while you're sitting in the classroom and nobody has to know. But they are all skills that activate your parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest system, and reduce fight or flight. And so they really calm you down quickly. It's most of our teens say that's one of their favorite skills because it works so well. But it is a great example of how we can use our resources, how we can use water, how we can use a frozen ice pack, or really run up and down the stairs, things that we can easily do to reduce our emotional intensity, to not act on urges and not do something that's going to make our lives worse, which is really what a coping skill is. It's not meant to make your life wonderful and better. It's meant to help you cope with something so you don't act on an urge to make your life worse.
And speaking about teens, you mentioned that you have helped thousands of them in terms of dealing with suicidal ideations. Can you share some success stories when it comes to that?
Yeah, I can share generally to protect confidentiality, but some of my favorite stories are around parents and teens who have come to our center and they are considering residential treatment centers, considering sending their teen away for 3-6 months because nothing has helped. They've been in the hospital, they've been in the intensive outpatient programs, and they're still engaging in these same behaviors. and then they go through our 6-month program. And, I've gotten multiple messages from families who child just graduated college, child is living on their own, they have a healthy relationship, they have a stable job. And so it's hundreds of stories of families that have gone from, we don't know what to do. We've seen 11 therapists. We've been in and out of the hospital. Should I send my teen away because nothing's working at home, to a complete turnaround where then we're seeing these life successes and these parents who felt like, will I ever be able to celebrate typical milestones of success with my child? Or will I always be white knuckling it, wondering, are they even going to make it through the day?
Mm, mm, mm. It's quite interesting in terms of that. I in a way, I wouldn't be fair if I just ended the episode here, but I just want to you talk about your book you've written. You are on fire. It's fine. Effective strategies for preparing teens with self-destructive behaviors. Self-destructive behaviors. What inspired you to write this book, and what key messages do you hope parents take away from it?
Yeah, I wrote this book after about 5 years of practice, noticing the gaps in what parents needed in the teenage work that we were doing at my center in the Philadelphia area. We were noticing that teens were getting better, but we were having them return into homes where parents didn't know how to support progress. And so things were kind of falling apart once they were done with therapy. We weren't seeing the lasting changes that we wanted because parents weren't also making changes. So it was a lot of reflecting on what is it that parents need to know in order to help teens be successful and help themselves be successful in parenting during the teenage years. And what I hope parents will take away from it, because what it does is it combines my story as a teenager, my story as a parent, and my expertise as a teen therapist. I hope parents will learn that they are doing the best they can, but there's a whole lot more that they can learn, and that they really need to look at themselves to recognize what needs to change in order for their teen to change, and that they do have a lot of influence over teens getting better. There's so much research behind unilateral change, the idea that even if a teen isn't in therapy, if a parent is making the changes that I talk about in my book, you will see changes at home because you're changing the system and your teen exists within that system.
And also doing true things in a systematic way, it really helps one, because you in a way, if you come across that certain problem, you are able to I would say combat it. You're able to cope with it. As you said, that you having a 12-year experience within this field, and it really has helped you in terms of parenting. So
Yeah.
for parents and teens listening to this podcast who might be struggling right now, what words of encouragement would you offer them?
It does get better. I know that's very general encouragement, but what I would say is, if you are struggling right now, one of my biggest tips is to track the struggle. Use a calendar, use a note in your phone. If you're self-harming, how often is it happening? What's happening before the self-harm? Bring as much information as you can to a therapist, preferably a DBT therapist, because they are intended for self-harm and suicidal behaviors. But track the information to really see that baseline. What I find is that it feels really hopeless when you're in the midst of these self-destructive behaviors. But when you can understand where it started and then start to do a little bit of work, you can actually see the progress of frequency of self-harm going down or intensity of your emotions going down. I'm big on data driving what we're doing. And I think that can actually generate hope for families. Is, where am I now? Where do I want to be? And then let's actually look at the numbers to see what's improving.
Katie, has been enlightening to have you on the show, and thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for sharing your experience with having been from being a troubled teen to someone that specializes in teens when it comes to mental health in general, where we explored suicide and self-harm. And I believe those are two things that I would say teens really struggle with. And through your work, through your advocacy, I believe that advocacy, because when you are any individuals that comes out and being able to pop in a podcast like these ones, you're able to drive that word of mental health and try by any means to destroy the stigma around in terms of suicide and self-harm. And it's something that parents usually don't see regularly, you see. And also when it comes to mental health, taking from experience how I have seen the field in general when it comes to the society, it's something that is not looked upon per se, and it really takes courage of going out and trying to make a change out there. So with those words, thank you so much.